The real second video focuses on, among other things, the Milgram Experiment, which is an infamous experiment in psychology. And the video did a pretty good job of describing it, but I want to make sure that you understand the particulars of it. First of all, could I have a volunteer or two to hand these out while I'm talking? Haley? Thank you. And Portia, just split it and hand things out. Anyone who's not here, just put it, leave it in the folder. People who live or travel near college campuses can make some extra money by volunteering for experiments, to be experimental test subjects. You can do this yourself. It's weird. It's something I never did because I find the idea creepy, but it is something you can do. So people volunteered to be test subjects, and they were brought into a room. Actually, they were in a waiting room, and they could sometimes see through a glass window in the door, sometimes not. And when they were done waiting, they would be brought into a room. They'd sit down at a desk where there is an electronic control that has two things, a dial and a button. And there's a window with a microphone. And on the other side of the window is a person who is strapped to a bunch of electrodes. Now, there are microphones linking everything and everyone, and what the person who's strapped to the electrodes is subjected to are a series of questions. Now, when asked questions, sometimes the person with the electrodes answered wrong. And what the test subject was supposed to do was adjust the intensity of the shock and then activate the electrodes. Ah! And in doing so, administer the shock. And each time a wrong answer was given, you had to turn up the knob and administer the shock. As the video said, in reality, you were not administering anything. The person was acting who was seeming to receive the shock, but you didn't know that. What you were told was that the test was about whether that person, through what is in psychology, thank you, is called operant conditioning, which is carrot and stick, reward and punishment stuff, whether operant conditioning can stimulate learning. That's what they were told. But what's really happening is, will a everyday American administer pain on demand to a fellow human being? Now, there is, like every other experiment, a fundamental presupposition of Judeo-Christian values. Every experiment has certain fundamental presuppositions, prejudices you can call them, or just assumptions that you have to make in order to do anything. Well, the presupposition here is that the American is a member of Western civilization. Western civilization has been steeped in Judeo-Christianity for, well, from 300 or so AD up till the 1970s at least. We were a self-consciously Judeo-Christian society and proud of it. And the thing about Christianity and Judaism is it says that every single individual, without exception, is made in God's image. And therefore, every single individual has a bit of God in them. That's their immortal soul. And therefore, that every single individual, without exception, beautiful or ugly, smart or stupid, connected or socially inept, that every single individual has priceless, inestimable value. You cannot really put a price on a human being, despite what the Vikings did with Vergeld, which is blood price, and despite every society before industry buying and selling people as slaves. The religious truth at the heart of Western civilization says human beings are beyond value, and the individual matters. Now, this is not a universal assumption. There are many cultures and certainly many political systems that could not give a good goddamn about human beings and their comforts. They are not about the individual. They're about the collective. They're about the leader. They're about the party. They're about the utopia, the ideology. They're not about the individual. But our Western civilization is distinct in its absolute insistence that each individual life matters. And that's where freedom comes from. So the assumption that Milgram has is that everyone on a gut level who he's going to invite in knows it's wrong to inflict pain for no good reason. that if you're going to inflict harm on somebody, you'd better have a darn good reason to do it. That's the assumption. And as you heard, over half the people did it on command. Zah! Oh, wrong again. Zah! Oh, wrong again. Zah! Again and again and again. Whatever culture says, there is a wiring to human beings. Biochemical programming, call it what you will. It's why most societies forbid cannibalism. Cannibalism is not debatable. Let's discuss the good sides of cannibalism. Or sex with children. No, we don't put up with that crap. Because nobody wants to be lunch. And because no one wants to, either as a child or with children that they love, have some old pervert mess with them sexually. So almost universally, with a very few exceptions, human societies do not permit cannibalism or sex with children. For the same reasons that that's true, we are not wired to slap someone around or hurt someone without having a reaction. Most human beings who are not insane will have a visceral reaction to hurting someone. The sick thing is it might be pleasurable, or it might be horror. But if it's pleasurable, it's the kind of pleasure that some people get in combat, where they say after the fact, the worst thing, the thing I'm most ashamed of, is that I enjoyed killing the enemy. It's not real pleasure. What it is stress masquerading as pleasure, as the kind of, humor that makes you laugh uncontrollably at a funeral, which can happen. So, is it, in fact, Judeo-Christian morality that's being violated? Or when you go, is it something more basic? Is it something that we are wired into, not to harm other people without a good reason to override our resistance to harm other people? My first question to you is, what does any of this have to do with freedom or communism or totalitarianism? What does the Milgram Experiment or anything in the second video have? Now, you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 as I'll take a volunteer. What, does anyone not understand the question? What does the Milgram Experiment or anything in the second video have to do with freedom or totalitarianism? Freedom or its absence? I see no questions. Roll. 13. So, 3, 6, 9, 12, 13. Ms. Robinson.
I think it has to do with the fact with freedom you have a choice versus in totalitarianism. I cannot speak Spanish.
Totalitarianism.
Thank you. You don't have a choice, and same with socialism, because at that point the government is running everything. And in regards to choice, it does not necessarily have to deal with the choice of what is morally right and wrong, but rather more along the everyday factors of life.
Okay. So in a command society rather than a free society, you are not expected to have the right to say no. Your betters have told you. You're expected to comply. Those who are wiser or smarter than you have given an order, you are expected to obey. So the very structure of society is reinforced by hierarchy. Okay, that's a start. Does anyone have anything they wish to add to that? What does the Milgram Experiment, or the second video, have to do with tyranny? Other than the fact that in a tyrannical society, the individual is not given the scope to say no. Yeah.
Given the illusion that somebody is of a higher position than you are, or has a higher power than you are, it automatically makes people need to say, okay, I'll do what you want. And the whole thing is like, as a Christian, no human being is higher than any other human being except for Jesus. But, like, just the idea of totalitarianism saying, and that experiment, having a normal person come in pretending to be a doctor or a lab coat person, saying, do this because it's just trust me. Like, it's just the human mind saying, okay, they're important, even though they're probably not.
Well, they are the bringers of pleasure and pain. In a hierarchy, your betters can bring you happiness or sadness. They can bring you joy or they can bring you trauma because they can reward or punish you with food, with opportunities, with torture. So it's not an illusion. When you're in a slave society, you are actually at the mercy of merciless people. Yeah, but
So to add on to both of your things, so I feel like fear and respect can really push our decisions. So if we fear something more, we'll follow that fearful thing because we're afraid of punishment or like something being taken away, like in total.
But you also said the word respect.
Yes, so if we respect someone, we will follow them as well, usually, unless they do wrong.
Okay. So there's fear, there's self-interest, there's respect. Haley said something that's rather important to understanding Western civilization and why Judeo-Christian values have been so important to it. In most societies, the emperor is equivalent to God. King James I of England actually said kings are gods. And he's a Westerner. He was trying to import an Eastern idea of absolutism. Even in the Roman Empire, when it was Christian at the end, and the Byzantine Empire, which was Christian throughout its 1,000-year history, the emperor was God's chief human. So God gives the emperor authority over everyone else, and therefore can reward or punish in nomine Deus as well as in nomine Regius, in the name of God as well as in the name of the king. So in the West, because there is no Roman emperor until Charlemagne, and after him, the Roman emperors are appointed by the popes who are basically equal in power. The notion that Christ is the only true king, the notion that our chief loyalty is not to the government, but is to a religious notion independent of the government, that's something that helps bring freedom out of the Western tradition as well, which does not exist in the Eastern or Southern traditions. The notion that your conscience is captive to God, not to the state. Yeah.
I think the other thing that played a part in that experiment is like we don't blame ourselves anymore for what we're doing because somebody else told us to do it. It's their fault for telling us that. Like we saw that's really evident. Like Nazi Germany, that was a very prominent thing.
I was just following orders. And you've got to understand, America has nothing to do with the kind of hierarchy that traditional Germany did and does have.
Well, and I think
I will go on, and then you can go on. Germany was, especially during the time of the Kaiser and of Hitler, but it still has this, an extremely authority-driven society where it's not only that they're the boss of you if they hold legitimacy, there is a moral sense of duty and of obligation to obey. So anyway, go on.
Well, I don't think that works. I think that has failed continually, and I think what Orwell made was something much more perfect in its ability to control. And I think what he describes is like people no longer needing to be told. We abandon completely our sense of this is like subconsciously wrong. We abandon that entirely in Orwell. And instead it's just since reality is so perfectly morphed into whatever the state wants it to be, we have nothing to anchor with, Shapiro was saying.
It's not just Orwell, though. In Stalin's Russia and throughout the Soviet period in general. In communist China, then and now. In North Korea, in Cuba, in Venezuela, in every totalitarian, in fascist Italy, in Nazi Germany. What part of National Socialist German Workers' Party is unclear? All of these societies cause you to feel owned, cause you to let them think for you, either because you respect them or fear them or both. Usually no.
Well, I think I think for a state like that to ever succeed for any kind of time, you have to make the people believe, like, a completely abandon morality. But I think that the more perfect kind of totalitarianism is like where the people believe that whatever the state says is just inherently correct.
Indeed. Václav Havel, the first free president of post-communist Czechoslovakia, who was a playwright and was imprisoned and tortured by the communists in Czechoslovakia, once said, the worst thing those communists ever did to me was make me censor myself. But there comes a point, and this is what Robespierre was hoping for in France. It's what Hébert was hoping for in dechristianizing. You don't censor yourself. You actually believe that 2 + 2 is whatever the leader says. You actually lose your grip on independent, objective reality, and that is ultimately the goal of totalitarianism.
Yeah.
Now, the question I'm now going to ask everyone again, and I'm going to roll the dice, is, and Sam is right on point on what he said. What's the motive? You can use the first video and the second video, anything that you've seen or heard or from life. What is the motive to do this kind of thing? Is it mustache-twirling, monomaniacal power hungriness, a nihilistic sense that me strong, you weak, it's fun to be strong, it's good to be, or is there something else? What is the motive behind this sort of stuff? This sort of stuff being the mind-bending that goes on and the political torture and everything else. And again, we will roll. 3. Sarah!
Okay, so I think every person has bias, and under like a religious or ethical standpoint or bias that they have, I think everybody has a point of view where they have the best intentions, and this greatly differs among religions and ethics, but they're believing that under like a sense of consequentialism, which isn't always the case, but they believe that under consequentialism, that in order to create utopia, like what Shapiro said, they have to undergo like killing to make a better world, and they believe that this is for the greater good, but it's not always the case.
Well, you answered it perfectly well. Thank you. They're not nihilists. They're utopians. And utopianism is one of the universal components of any socialism. Let's take, for example, veganism, which is a variant of dietary utopianism. Vegans eat only plant matter. No meat, no dairy. Vegans say that if you compare the amount of resources, land and water, necessary to grow wheat with the amount of resources necessary to keep any livestock, whether it's cows, pigs, goats, sheep, or whatever, you will see that with current global populations, the consumption of meat is unsustainable, and that we as human beings, if we love the planet and if we love ourselves, should convert to a completely vegan lifestyle. Now, if that is the utopian proposition, we should all be vegan. What is necessary to make something like that happen? Are you willing to rely, if you are a true believer in it, let's assume you're true believers, and some of you may be, what are you willing to do to see that that better world is achieved? Are you willing to proselytize and educate, to promote your ideas and leave it to people to decide? That would be a very American, very Western European sort of thing to do. However, you're going to have people like me. One of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life is I had a friend in high school. We were at a cafeteria, and he was in line. And a few places back, there was a guy talking to his girlfriend, and they were both vegetarians. And they were loud enough for everyone to hear, just nastily commenting on everyone who took meat. And my buddy, who was a bit of a thug, went back and said, "You're vegetarians, aren't you?" And they said, "Yeah, I'm proud of it." That makes you lower on the food chain. That makes you food. Shut right up. I I love that. So there are people like him and like me who believe, okay, you don't want to eat meat, fine, that's more steak for me. No. So there are some people who will say, no, you can't trust people to do the right thing, which is the beginning of fanaticism. You can't trust people to do the right thing. So what we've got to do is use operant conditioning, reward and punishment. And that is where you get over 100 million civilians murdered in peacetime in variant forms of socialism in fewer than 100 years. 100 million people murdered for thought crime around the world from the period of the Bolshevik Revolution to about 10 years ago. Yes, or 5 years ago.
I have a couple of things I want to say.
Be quick because of time.
I wonder if the person who spearheads totalitarianism is almost brainwashing themselves into abandoning morality.
Stalin never felt remorse. Hitler never felt remorse. Mao never felt remorse. They were building a better world.
Well, and if you push a narrative enough, you believe it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how that
Which
works.
is the trap of subjectivism, which is what Shapiro was ultimately saying. If you convince yourself, and this is, people wonder why. Why do I make an issue of male and female as prime traits? When so many people would desperately want everyone to believe that gender is just fluid and a choice. I can't do that. It's fundamentally untrue. And if you can get me, or anyone like me, who just doesn't believe it, who sees sex and gender as the exact same thing, who sees the attempt to make gender fluid as an attempt to make me lie and betray my own sense of objective reality for the sake of social acceptance, to hell with that. I'll be a martyr or an outcast before I betray my sense of reality. Because once you start down that road of living in someone else's lie out of fear or respect, your ability to recognize reality and truth in your own mind begins to become weaker, degraded, deteriorated. You owe it to yourself, whatever your truth is, whether it agrees with mine or not. I don't care about that. You owe it to yourself to keep as pure as possible your ability to notice things in the world that are objectively real and acknowledge them and not fall into the trap, the self-hypnosis of subjectivism, where you say that reality is what the leader says, or reality is what the ideology says, or reality is what the party says, or reality is what social media says, or everyone around you says. Come on, you don't want to be a nasty person. You don't want to make somebody who's in a certain community feel bad about themselves. Come on, just say it. You'll be a nice person. We'll all like you. We'll be your friend. All you have to do is say that 2 + 2 is whatever the leader wants. All you have to do is speak falsehood. That's all. The destruction of a soul, I'm not speaking religiously, I'm speaking philosophically. The destruction of a personality usually is not a great legendary moment where you're with a sword against a dragon. It's where you agree to do something that you know is wrong for the sake of expediency. And once you start down that road, it becomes easier and easier and easier. The first time you do it, you feel horrible. The second time, you justify it. The third, by the 5th or 6th time you do it, it's just part of life.
Things like veganism that you're talking about. I think little things like that are what starts chain reaction.
Yeah. Do you want a vegetarian or a vegan to feel uncomfortable? Why not agree with their point? And ultimately, you are called a bad person for not going along with the lie. What kind of bad person would be so mean-spirited that they would believe against what the crowd wants you to believe? We will talk more. Thank you for your conversation, your attention. Have a good and wonderful day.